All right. Can everyone hear me? All right. Well, I'm going to kind of stand over here and here. I did want to show, after we signed on to support this, the Poverty Line Act, we got the letter from your office, Congressman, and so I framed it for the team. We're very excited to be here. That's not the point of what I came up here to say right now, but in case you're wondering why I'm carrying around a frame. But hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Batson. I'm the interim CEO at United Way Bay Area. I've been at the United Way for 17 years, and I started out on our free tax preparation program, helping people claim really valuable tax credits that changed their lives, and could see firsthand for myself sort of the distance between what it takes to live here and what people have in income. So I'm excited to be here that we're putting sort of the action behind what we know about community. So our mission at United Way is to mobilize the Bay Area to dismantle the root causes of poverty and build equitable pathways to prosperity. And we do that through initiatives and policy change. We're looking at both the immediate and the long-term systems change work that we need to do. And we're focused in 4 areas. That's housing justice, financial stability, employment, and meeting basic needs. And we envision an equitable Bay Area where everyone has the resources and the opportunities that they need to thrive. And my guess is you're here today because you think the same thing and you have that same vision. And I'm so grateful because I know for a fact that Congressman Mullen shares that vision with us. Congressman, thank you for your leadership and for authoring the Poverty Line Act. We have to reimagine a system that works for everyone, and the acknowledgement that the current federal poverty line does not do that is really important for the conversation. And thank you for reimagining what the Bay Area needs and what the country needs. And we know that understanding the needs and the strengths of our communities is key to achieving that mission and that vision that I already mentioned. And for years, I've been talking about the real cost measure in grant proposals and conversations, in all of the things that I do around, countless events where I'm naming this statistic, right? This data point. Over 600,000 households do not have what they need to cover their basic necessities. It takes $120,000 a year for a family of 4 to afford to live here. And that's not the reality of what people have. So I just want to add a huge thanks to United Ways of California for your persistent leadership and empowering us with this data so that we could come here and actually take some action. So I am going to pass it now to United Ways of California, Henry at United Ways of California, so we can learn some more about what this means for our neighbors here in the Bay Area, and then I'll see you at the end again. Thank you so much for being here today. I will note you have a QR code in front of you, so I hope you'll use that to find more information about today's event. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Kelly. And just a big thanks to Congressman Mullen's office and United Way of the Bay Area for bringing us all here together, and bringing food, coffee, refreshments, and to talk about some of the values that we all share in terms of helping low-income families reach a decent standard of living. So I'm here to talk about I'm here with United Ways of California, and we support the work of all 28 local United Ways throughout the entire state, primarily by helping them to improve health, education, and financial stability for low-income children and families. And United Way of the Bay Area has been a fantastic partner in that goal. So I'm here to talk about the real cost measure and what it takes to really make ends meet throughout California. And before I want to go through the presentation and talk about all these data points, I want to have a little bit of an interactive conversation with you. So imagine you're all part of a family of 4. You have 2 adults, 1 preschooler, and 1 school-aged child. Think about the neighborhood that you live in. How much would your family have to spend on housing every month to make ends meet? Shout it out. Your neighborhood, family of 4, how much would your family have to spend on housing to make ends meet per month? I'm sorry? $5,100. What neighborhood? East Palo Alto. Any other guesses? 5,000? What area? Berkeley. Okay. 5,000. Milpitas. It's 2 children, 1 preschooler, 1 school-age child, and 2 adults. How much would you have to spend on housing per month to make ends meet? 5,000. Okay, 5,000 guesstimate. What? 10,000. Okay. What neighborhood are you thinking about? Okay, San Mateo. All right, great. What about food? Family of 4, preschooler, school-age child. How much would you have to spend monthly? Wow, it's quite a bit. Any other guesstimates? Yeah, 2,000. Okay, couple of Costco trips embedded in there, right? Okay. Childcare, preschooler, and a school-age child. What does that look like? 4,000 immediately. Yeah. Any other guesstimates? It looks like some of you are experiencing this challenge right now from the look at some of your faces, right? Healthcare. It doesn't matter if it's employer-sponsored coverage, if you're paying out of pocket. What does that look like per month in terms of what you're paying for healthcare for a family of 4? 2,000. 2,500, right? And different families have different needs, right? With whatever conditions that they may be going through, medications, pharmacy, and everything else, right? Transportation. Think about the past couple of years, right? What does that look like for a family of 4? It could be car payments, maintenance, whatever. Public transportation, add it all up. What would that look like for a family of 4 per month? 1,800, right? So that's the really point. It's really expensive to live here in California, right? And one of the reasons why we do this is because there's some inefficiencies with the official poverty measure. What do you know about the official poverty measure and how is it calculated? It's old. Yes, it's very old. Does anybody know how old? Not quite prehistoric era, right? But it was during the 1960s, right? And very famously, President Lyndon Johnson declared a war on poverty during his administration. And if you're going to declare a war on something, it's generally a good thing to have some sort of instrument to measure it by. So very famously, an official within his department, within the Labor Department, looked at the cost of living for many families, right, during the 1950s and 60s. And how many of you remember the TV series The West Wing from the early 2000s? Okay, yes, smiling faces. So here's a little clip that actually might remind you in terms of how the official poverty measure. This was from an episode back in 2002. We can get the audio working. Okay, so bear with me because we're going to disengage from this sound. Bear with me a second. All right, I'll try it again.
On Monday, the OMB is putting out a new formula for calculating the poverty level.
I saw that. Does it need presidential approval before it goes to Congress?
Yeah.
What's the problem?
It's a good news, bad news thing. Under the new formula, poverty is up 2%. It was anyone under 17,524 before. Now it's 20,000.
What does that check out to?
4 million new poor people.
4 million?
Yeah, obviously that's the bad news.
Yeah?
The good news is that more people will be eligible for benefits.
And taxpayers are nuts about that. Let's get back to the bad news. 4 million people became poor on the president's watch.
They didn't become poor. They were poor already. And now we're calling them poor.
What was wrong with the old formula?
I don't know.
Find out.
It's possible that this is a statistical reality and not a political fight.
We'll get with someone at OMB and find out what was wrong with the statistical reality of the old formula.
Yeah.
Do it today.
Yeah.
It's like when they did the thing with the SAT scores and I got dumber 20 years after I went to college.
It's a little like that.
Talk to somebody?
Yeah.
Hey, Sam.
Sam.
Yeah.
Bernice Collette.
Thanks.
Hey, Sam.
How you doing, Bernie?
Not wild about people calling me Bernie.
Sure. What should I call you?
Bernice is fine.
But how will you know I'm your buddy?
I'm okay living in the dark on that.
Okay. Can you tell me how the current standard was reached?
The new one?
The current one. The new one hasn't been signed off on.
We have to sign off on it.
Why?
It's much more accurate.
How was the old one reached? The current one.
In 1963, an Eastern European immigrant named Molly Orshansky, who was working over in Social Security, came up with it. Food was the most costly living expense where she came from.
Our cost of living formula for the last 40 years has been based on life in Poland during the Cold War.
This is what I'm talking about. Food doesn't account for 1/3 of a family's budget. Housing is more expensive than food. The current model also doesn't take into account transportation and health insurance. So let's call the current model the old model and sign off on the new model.
All right. Sit down.
So good context there. That episode was filmed about 25 years ago, and we still haven't moved the needle on the official poverty measure. It is largely still based on the cost of food from the 1960s. And Molly Orshansky, God bless her, she was actually born in Brooklyn, born and raised in Brooklyn, not in Poland. So good context there, just in terms of just how people actually lived and how during the 1950s and 60s, what was important, what was expensive back then, versus where we are here in 2024, and the realities of our economy are significantly different than they were back then. So we created a new self-sufficiency standard back in 2015 that better reflects the cost of living that many California households experience through every day, including the things that we just talked about: housing, food, healthcare, transportation, and other basic needs, for a far more accurate measure of what it takes to make ends meet throughout California. And in doing so, we focused on working households throughout the entire state. So if we're focusing on working households, those who pay taxes, who are we excluding? Yeah. Good, yeah, exactly. Those who are not working, reporting taxes, those who are disabled, the homeless, for the most part, also don't report taxes, and seniors. And seniors, we actually work with the UCLA Fielding School of Public Health, and they produce the Elder Index, where they find about 33% of senior-led households throughout California also struggle to make ends meet. What's the biggest barrier that seniors face in terms of making ends meet of all those basic needs? Healthcare, yeah, absolutely. Healthcare cost goes up, especially as you grow older. Fixed income, that's right. Social Security is definitely a form of fixed income from there, right? So, and Social Security is actually probably the most successful anti-poverty program that we have here in the United States, in addition to the Earned Income Tax Credit and other types of support. Yeah, that's right, it does. So one of the first things that we did in terms of creating this methodology is we created household budgets all the way from 1 adult in a household all the way up to 20 adults in a household for all 58 counties in California. That's a whole bunch of different configurations, 1,200 different configurations, which is pretty amazing. And all of the data that we use to calculate the real cost measure comes from publicly available government data. Right? And to find out who is struggling behind the numbers, we use the American Community Survey by the US Census. So you can't really get more statistically reliable than this. In fact, we have a 99% confidence interval in our data results when we produce this every 2 years. And the great thing about the real cost measure is that we have statewide level data, we have regional level data, such as the San Francisco Bay Area and Southern California, we have county level data for most of the 58 counties throughout the state. And the great thing is we have neighborhood level data. So we can actually take a look what the disparities look like within the San Francisco Bay Area, within San Mateo County, and other parts of the state as well. I'm not going to wonk out too much on all the data sources that we use for the real cost measure, but here it is. And the goal of the real cost measure is to determine what's the minimum amount that a household needs to earn to make ends meet. The bare minimum, the barest essentials. So in order to do that, we use fair market rent rates by HUD, which is the 40th percentile of gross rents, right? It's also used to determine the cost of Section 8 housing. But we know that the cost of housing is easily 40, even up to 60% higher than fair market rent rates, especially here in San Mateo County, right? We use the low-cost food plan by the U.S. Department of Agriculture to look at food costs. We know how much food costs have changed, especially over the past couple of years. This recent study is produced from 2021, which is the most recent data that we had available at the time. We're going to release a new study next year, which is going to go through 2024, I believe. And then we use the Consumer Expenditure Survey data to look at healthcare and transportation costs. And we've gotten really good in terms of calculating taxes, including incorporating payroll taxes and child care tax credits, which are realities that many working households have to deal with every single day, right? So here's what we found. This same family of 4 with 2 adults, 1 preschooler, and 1 school-age child has to earn at least $141,000 in income annually to make ends meet here in San Mateo County alone. That's a lot of money, right, for any household. But let's take a look at the challenges that a family who is below the real cost measure has to experience and finding out what that income level looks like for them. I think we found out there were over almost 700 families in San Mateo that fell below the real cost measure. There were 2 adults, 1 preschooler, and 1 school-age child. I think it's a pretty fixable problem, 700 families. But anyway, $80,000 on average in wages, $226 in interest and other types of income, $214 in retirement income, and $854 from the earning of tax credit. As we learned, it's also one of the most successful anti-poverty programs that we have here in the U.S. When you total that up, it's about $82,000 in income and public benefits altogether. But look at the income gap that it takes to reach the real cost measure, over $60,000. So my question to you is, how do they do it? How do struggling families work to make ends meet? Yeah, more than one family in a household, it doubles up. And the reality is that no 2 families often have the same circumstances in terms of how they do it, what the sacrifices that they make each and every day to make ends meet. Some would try to negotiate with their landlord to see if they can pay half of this month's rent and catch up the next month. Some would skip out entirely on going out for food, right? Doing whatever can in terms of utilizing whatever resources that they have in their pantry to make ends meet. And even skipping out on licensed childcare and having family and friends taking care of their kids as well. Low-income families are often some of the most financially literate people out there because they use their resources so wonderfully well and they manage them so well in an attempt to make ends meet every single month, right? These are the realities, but it really depends on every family in terms of how they do it and how they make ends meet. It's really on a case-by-case basis. So let's take a look at how San Mateo County compares to other counties throughout the state, using that same example of 2 adults, 1 preschooler, 1 school-age child. I see many of you taking photos. We're going to make sure you all get the slides as well. So as long as you registered, went through the portal, we'll send you all the slides, and you'll be able to use these talking points when you actually have conversations with your kid for dinner tonight, right? So look at Ventura County, the same family of 4, 2 adults, 1 preschooler, 1 school-age child, $97,000 to make ends meet. In LA County, $98,000, right? Orange County, $109,000. Even higher on average than LA County, right? This is a cost of living crisis that we're experiencing right now throughout the entire state. And this is some of this are really astonishing numbers. And even the Central Valley has been experiencing some interesting patterns. We're actually finding more and more families are paying more for licensed childcare than they are for housing. So easily we're finding that the cost of childcare and housing are the 2 primary barriers that are preventing families to make ends meet here throughout California. So let's get a little bit more granular with the data in terms of, let's look at 3 different housing types. Let's look at 2 adults in the first column, that same example of 2 adults, 1 preschooler, 1 school-age child in the second column. And look what happens in that third column when the children get older. What differences do you see between the second and third columns? Childcare, yeah, childcare. Look at the big difference there. It goes from $26,000 on average to about $10,000, right? Young kids are great, but they're also expensive, right? And it's really the cost of childcare that really speaks to this as well. And you can actually just see just the cost of housing, $42,000 just on average, right? Just the bare minimum using fair market rent rates. And the farther below you fall the real cost measure, we could easily see many families paying 60, 70, or 80% of their income on housing alone. It's astonishing. So here's our primary finding. Usually the official poverty measure, the federal poverty measure that we talked about early on, hovers between 12 and 15% in California, primarily based on the cost of food. But when you look at the real cost measure, you incorporate housing, food, healthcare, transportation, and the other basic needs that we just talked about, 34% of families are struggling to make ends meet in California. So we often talk about how California is the 5th largest economy in the world, thanks partially to Brexit, who's now kind of falling behind with the economy, right? But what does it say about our society when we're the 5th largest economy in the world and 1/3 of our household population is struggling to make ends meet? That's the cost of living crisis. And when we quantify this, it's 3.7 million households throughout the state that are struggling to make ends meet, not individuals, households. You can easily use a multiplier of 2.5 to actually, put that number in context, right? Well over 10 million who are struggling below the real cost measure. So here's the map of neighborhood clusters throughout California. And neighborhood clusters is a US Census designation for public use microdata areas. They just consolidate neighborhoods that are right next to each other to get a sample size of 100,000 people to make it statistically reliable. And there's 265 of these neighborhood clusters throughout California, easily the most in the entire nation. But you can actually see the deep pockets of struggle in the Central Valley, the eastern part of San Bernardino counties, the Central Valley, and even parts of Northern California as well. But look at the differences between the highest and the lowest. Only 11% of households in Walnut Creek, Lafayette, Orinda, and Moraga are struggling to make ends meet, compared to an astonishing 76% of households in the community of East Vernon, an industrial community right in the heart of Los Angeles. Night and day, right, in terms of how these communities live, what kind of resources they have access to, what their housing looks like, what access to food they have on a regular basis. It's night and day. And you can actually even see the big disparities even in the Central Valley and here in the San Francisco Bay Area, the amount of food deserts, et cetera, that are prevalent. Here in San Mateo County, it's not quite as high as the statewide average, but we're still finding 28% of households here in San Mateo County are struggling to make ends meet. 1 in 4, right? More than 1 in 4 are struggling. That's astonishing. You don't usually think about San Mateo that way, but a quarter of the household population is struggling. And when we quantify that, it's over 62,000 households. Here's a big complicated map of the San Francisco Bay Area, right, in terms of just what it looks like with the real cost measure as well. You can actually see some, for the most part, many communities here in the Bay Area are between 11 and 25% below the real cost measure, but there's pockets like East San Jose, right, South Oakland, that are really struggling to make ends meet. And we see even almost 60% of households right in South Central Oakland, in Alameda County are struggling to make ends meet, once again compared to 11% of households in Walnut Creek, Lafayette, Orinda, and Moraga. What is that? Maybe a 15, 20-minute commute on a good day, right, between those two neighborhoods, and they're just light and day in terms of what they look like and what the cost of living really looks like between those two communities. And when we look at San Mateo County, here are the 6 neighborhood clusters that we look at. It partly covers South San Francisco, San Bruno, and Brisbane, all the way down to the Half Moon Bay. But you can actually even see the northern part of the county, 37% of households in San Bruno and Brisbane are struggling to make ends meet, compared to about 20% here in Redwood City, San Carlos, and in Belmont. So it's always interesting to look at the maps in the neighborhoods and even figuring out what that looks like within the counties as well. Here's one thing that we always find fascinating every time we release the study, is that we find that 97% of those who are below the real cost measure, especially here in San Mateo County, have at least 1 working adult. Right? So these are not families that are looking to take advantage of the public benefit system. They're certainly using the resources that are available to them, right, in terms of SNAP and everything else. But it still speaks to the fact that these are hardworking families, right? And they often work in different circumstances. It could be 1 full-time job. It could be multiple members of the family working various part-time jobs as well, right? There was a great book by Jonathan Schneider that came out a few years ago called The Financial Diaries. And he was wondering, why is it so difficult for some of these families to save and catch up and use some of that income over the year to actually save up when they need to go ahead and pay their bills the most? And one of the things that they realize is that those who are in manufacturing, in retail, and agriculture simply can't save because of seasonal work. And it makes a lot of sense. So in retail, for example, the end of the year comes along, November, December, right? Everybody's in the mood for holiday shopping. They're asked to come into work, and they increase the amount of employees that they have at their store. And then they increase their hours. And then January comes along, and they're asked to, they're told that we actually don't need you anymore. We've actually fulfilled our summer holiday seasonal work. So it's that up and down, that seasonal work, that ebb and flow during the calendar year that makes it really hard for low-income families to make ends meet. And those are in agriculture. Here we are in California, one of the more prosperous agricultural areas. It's really hard to have that consistent income so you can actually consistently pay your bills and make ends meet throughout the entire calendar year. So we looked at San Mateo County, and we've been releasing this study since about 2015. And you can actually just take a look. Look at the big disparities between the real cost measure and the official poverty measure. This is just in 2014. In 2014, we found 24% of households over 65,000 fell below the real cost measure. And if we play the brief history of time, look at how the disparities kind of ebb and flow throughout the entire year. Look at the difference here in the 2020-21 data. We find that there's the difference between the real cost measure and the official poverty measure is an astonishing 408% here in San Mateo County alone, right? It's a huge story, right? And this pretty much tells us why the official poverty measure is really outdated, and it really doesn't mean much for many of us here in 2024. So we also take a look at who's struggling behind the data. We looked at ethnicity, right? And in a lot of our social science research, they always suggest that Latino and Black households always struggle the most. And our findings from the real cost measure data really echo that. We find that 53% of Latino families here in San Mateo County are struggling to make ends meet. More than half of the population. When we quantify that, that's almost 22,000 households. Let's look at it deeper. And here's the data that we have on Black households and Latino households. Huge disparities when we take a look at the degree of struggle within each of these different racial groups. We find 23% of Asian American households and 19% of white households who are struggling. It's one thing to take a look at the degree of struggle within these population groups, but I always like to look at the numbers, the raw numbers in terms of who's actually struggling by volume. And here's interesting data. Look at the second highest group who's struggling. It's usually more often than not, it's white households, right after Latinos in most of our statewide level data. So almost 21,000 white households are struggling. And we usually use a sample size of at least 5,000 households to look at our data to make sure it's consistent to that 99% confidence interval. But I wanted to show you what the Black household population looks like. And it's primarily just a reflection of how many Black people we actually have within the county. But we actually found 3,000 Black households here in San Mateo County are struggling to make ends meet. We also wanted to take a look at the intersection between educational attainment and the real cost measure as well. During the 1950s and 60s, if you graduated from high school, you had a pretty good chance of getting a good, reliable job, thanks to the presence of labor unions and other types of labor protections. Our economy has completely changed here in 2024. I think only 8 to 10% of our national economy is actually conducted by labor now. And you can actually just see even 16% of householders led by, with somebody with a bachelor's degree are struggling to make ends meet. And that's actually raising some good questions in terms of the value of education, right? And it's still kind of open for public debate in terms of, do you actually need a master's degree now to actually attain your family's financial security, right? And it kind of just really depends on what kind of academic history that you have, what kind of profession, what kind of line of work that you do that really makes a difference. But we're seeing those who are in liberal arts are experiencing great challenges in terms of the cost of living too. If we take a look at citizenship status, we can see 41% of non-citizens, householders, green card holders are struggling to make ends meet, 27%, compared to 24% of those who are US-born citizens. One of the things that we've been learning in our research through our partners at Measure of America, who create the US Human Development Index, is that the ability to speak English certainly goes a long way for families in terms of accessing public benefits. So just think about it. For many families who just speak Spanish or any other foreign languages, they often don't know where to go to in terms of where to identify after-school programs or where I can actually apply for benefits. They often rely on their kids to do that, their teenage kids. And it's often their teenage kids who are often their ambassadors in terms of finding out what services might be available for them in terms of childcare, after-school programs, public assistance, and everything else. And these kids are obviously forced to grow up older more often than they should. And single moms, right? 53% of single moms in San Mateo County are struggling to make ends meet here in San Mateo County. When we quantify that, that's over 6,000 households. Think about the single mom, just for a few minutes. Many of you might be single moms yourselves, right? You're not only the breadwinner for your family, but you're also the entire emotional support system for your family. Making sure that they wake up in the morning or go to school, make sure that they're fed, attend their after-school program, or tucked in at bed at night, do their homework. Often single moms, because of whatever employment circumstances that they have, might not always be there in the morning or in the afternoon or in the evening, right? So it's being able to help kids who are below the real cost measure certainly is a village. It takes a village to actually help them out, right? And it's often older kids who are taking care of younger kids in terms of child care assistance because that family simply can't afford child care. And even neighbors often do so as well. And you can actually just see the interesting data with single moms, even single dads. Single dads we often just don't talk about, but we have 45% of single dads here in San Mateo County are struggling to make ends meet, compared to 21% of married householders, primarily because they have two incomes coming into the household, right? And households with young children, this is primarily a reflection of the child care data, right? In terms of 37% of households with children between the ages of 0 and 5 are struggling to make ends meet, the most critical developmental years. And notice how almost 12,000 households, young children, struggle every single day to make ends meet through lack of food, nutrition, et cetera. So now that we talked about just the real cost measure data in terms of who's struggling, let's talk about housing burden for a second. Housing burden, we've been told for most of our lives that we shouldn't be spending more than 30% of our income in housing. I think we can pretty much throw that out the window here in California for most of us. We find that 35% of households here in San Mateo County spend at least 30% of their income on housing. I mean, it really depends on the state. Even in the Central Valley, we've seen many families spending 40 to 60% of their income on housing alone. But even still, we see 80,000 housing burdened households here in San Mateo County. So this really emphasizes that this is a challenge for us, not only for those who are below the real cost measure and those who are above the real cost measure as well. And you can actually see the degree of housing burden throughout the entire state. Even in greater Los Angeles, which includes LA, Ventura, and Orange counties, 44% of families to our neighbors down south are housing burdened, right? Trying to every day in terms of negotiating with their landlord, even trying to find affordable housing now has become a significant challenge. And even 42% of households in greater San Diego, which includes San Diego County and Imperial County. And yet here you can actually just see in terms of either if you're above or below the real cost measure, we're still seeing significant amounts of populations who are housing burdened, easily spending more than 30% of their income on housing. And when we take a look at the San Mateo map, here's the interesting story. It's pretty much consistent across the board here throughout the county. 39% of households in Daly City, Pacifica, Colma, South San Francisco are housing burdened compared to about 30% in Half Moon Bay. So even though the colors are different, it's actually not a big difference between 39, 30% in this context. So now that we've taken a look at real cost measure data and housing burden, let's take a look at what the income picture looks like throughout California using median household earnings, right? See some of you showing some unsurprising faces already, right? With the concentrated wealth here in the San Francisco Bay Area, right? But even with that, we actually recalculated the median household earnings to control for seniors and households led by persons with disabilities to really account for working households. But you can actually see the huge differences between Santa Clara County, $160,000 in median household income, compared to about $55,000 in Imperial County. And you can actually just see the degree of struggle where many households in Tulare County, Kern County, Merced County, many of them are earning between $55,000 and $66,000, where the state median average is about $95,000 per household. Huge differences. And you can actually see the dark green. We know there's a lot of concentrated wealth here in San Mateo County, but even this, and these are pretty astonishing figures, even looking at the data every time I see it, median household earnings in Menlo Park, East Palo Alto, and Atherton is almost $206,000. That doesn't mean, however, that there aren't struggling families in that neighborhood. So big macroeconomic context to this data, right? And this is data that's actually outside, that we released outside of our study after it's released, which really presents a macroeconomic picture to this, is that between 1984 and 2021, California's gross domestic product, which is the value of all goods and services produced in the state, increased 173%. Our economy's been growing. But notice how median household incomes has largely been flat since during that time. It only increased 4%. If this doesn't describe what's going on with our economy today, I'm not sure what does, right? And it also tells us that the middle class hasn't gotten a raise in over 4 decades. Even looking at some more longitudinal data, nationally, since the end of World War II, between 1948 and 2020, you can actually just see were doing pretty well in terms of our net productivity and how we were pretty well compensated for that work that we were doing during that time. But notice during late 1970s, early 1980s, how hourly compensation has pretty much flattened out for many workers. So the data, the government data that's available to us really speaks for itself. So that's it for the real cost measure. We want to hear from other speakers as well. But I just want to say that the real cost measure isn't just a study that we want to live on a website. This is the cost of living is a crisis that we all have to deal with on a regular basis. And we have a whole bunch of interactive tools to really help describe that, including a really great interactive data dashboard. We have one-page county profiles for many counties throughout California as well. And I just want to do a quick little exercise with you, just in terms of helping to imagine some other challenges for families here in San Mateo County. So go ahead and we're going to do this together in terms of what does it take ends meet for a family here in San Mateo County to make ends meet. So we have a cool little interactive calculator which reflects that. I'm going to choose San Mateo County. And there it is. And you tell me, give me some age numbers of some household members, and we'll figure out what it costs them to make ends meet. 39. Okay. 4. Okay. 39-year-old and a 4-year-old. What else? 25. This is an interesting family already. 65. We got a senior in there. And let's do one more. A 15. Wow, this is a really fascinating family. It is a multi-gender, and it represents California as well, right? So 2 adults, 39, 25, a toddler at the age of 4, a senior at 65, and a teenager at the age of 15. They would have to earn $171,000 in income here in San Mateo County to make ends meet. This is after taxes, right? Because we incorporated payroll taxes, childcare tax credits, and everything else. Huge, right? So this could be a great financial literacy tool, right, for your kids, right? And we've had many people actually have downloaded our public data set. I've actually used it for research. We have many nonprofits who use it for grant writing, as Kelly has done. Many foundations use it actually to create their RFP processes, but you can actually use it as a financial literacy tool. So when your teenage kid comes home after football or gymnastics practice, right? They're really hungry at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They raid the refrigerator, right? 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening comes along, and you open the refrigerator and everybody's asking themselves, where's dinner? This could be a good general intervention opportunity to talk about the cost of food with your kids. And while you're at it, run this whole calculator with them. This is how much you're costing me. I love you, but you're expensive, right? Housing, transportation, right? Give them a sense in terms of the sacrifices that you make every single day to appreciate the work that you do, right? And they'll have a better appreciation for you, and hopefully that will incentivize them to work harder with school, go to college, graduate, and become a productive member of society, right? So anyway, thanks so much. I'm going to make sure you get all these slides, and I want to turn it over to Jessica Hudson, who is the Manager of Public Policy here at United Way Bay Area.
Can you hear me okay? Yes. Do I just need to talk really loud? Yes. All right. Closer, better? No. All right. No? Okay. I'm Jess Hudson. I'm the Public Policy Manager for United Way Bay Area. I'm focused on serving San Mateo and Santa Clara counties. It is my absolute honor to introduce our Congressman Kevin Mullin today. He's a fourth-generation Californian. He's a San Mateo County native, proudly representing California's Congressional District 18 in House of Representatives. He previously represented San Mateo County in the California State Assembly from 2012 to 2022, serving as the Speaker Pro Tem. And he's a champion for climate resiliency. He's working hard to defend our democracy and build an economy that works for everyone. When he's not serving in Congress, he enjoys spending time with his wife and boys and following sports. Thank you so much, Kevin.
I think my little lapel mic is working. Yes. Excellent. Thank you so much, Jess, for the kind introduction. Henry, for that wonderful set of slides that beautifully illustrates the challenges we have here. That is an excellent foundational piece that I'm going to steal from. Just warning you, Henry. In fact, you may see some stolen bits right here in my little slide presentation. I know you have a lot of information coming at you. I'm going to move relatively quickly through the slides. We have an excellent panel discussion as well to kind of dig in, and we're hoping if we have time to get a few questions from our audience to make this interactive. But before I get rolling, Eric Lukoff is my legislative director. He flew out from Washington, D.C. He's definitely familiar with the Bay Area, but I wanted him to just raise his hand. Eric is working on this issue and can be an excellent contact for those of you who are working on this issue on a daily basis. This, I have to tell you, feels like it's probably going to be a little bit of a generational effort. I got to tell you, nothing this large is going to be easy. And the most powerful thing in politics, unfortunately, is the status quo. And we are trying to take on the status quo with this effort. And I'm going to need your help. And this is going to be, I hesitate to say Herculean effort. I don't want to overstate it. But the reality is there's a reason it hasn't changed since the 60s. And I will get into some of those challenges in just a little bit. But thank you so much to United Way Bay Area for your leadership, for convening us here today. You are the driving force behind this event today. And thank you so much for your ongoing work. Proud to be your representative in the 15th Congressional District. At the state level, I did 10 years in the legislature. And I'm proud that at that time, I authored AJR 40, which passed both chambers of the legislature, urging the federal government to reform the poverty line. Now that I'm in Congress, I'm proud to be leading this effort at the national level. So this is a multi-year effort already, and probably more to come on that. So here's a quick agenda for what I'm going to go through. First, I'll give you a little bit of background on the federal poverty line itself, discuss the bill, what it would do, what its potential impact will be, and then share our legislative strategy and the coalition that we need to put together to make this happen. As many of you in the room know, the federal poverty line, which the federal government sometimes refers to as the official poverty measure, is the primary eligibility criteria for dozens of federal programs. I don't need to tell you that the federal poverty line is out of date, way out of date. Too many families make too little income to make ends meet, yet they are unable to access safety net benefits like SNAP, Medicaid, and many others that can help them. This will come as no surprise, but there are essentially three problems with how the poverty line is constructed. It's based on a multiple of food costs in 1955, as Henry and Aaron Sorkin explained. It does not include modern expenses that we all agree are essential to social and economic mobility, including housing, healthcare, and childcare, along with transportation and utilities. It is not adjusted currently for regional differences, with the exception of slight differences in Alaska and Hawaii. The poverty line is $15,060 for a single adult and $31,200 for a family of four. So you heard from Henry in the previous discussion what it really takes to live in California. But this is really a national problem that we are talking about. To put a fine point on this, it's not just an issue for coastal cities or coastal counties like San Mateo. It is a national issue. Nonetheless, regional differences are extreme. For example, it costs nearly $100,000 more for a family to meet basic needs in San Mateo than in Houston, Texas. And even in Charleston, South Carolina, it's still about $102,000 to make ends meet. So either way, $31,200 for a family of four doesn't come anywhere close to meeting the needs. So why the current poverty? Check, 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 1, 2, 1, 2. Check, 1, 2. Okay. I'm still going to have to project. Okay. Why the current poverty line is so out of date is because it's based on a 1960s calculation, the Johnson administration. This isn't to say that nothing has happened in this area. There have been a number of subsequent, look at this slide, and It's a little hard to read, but study after study, task force after task force, telling us what we already know, which is that the status quo is not working. A variety of recommended changes, but outside of some very minor adjustments in the 1970s and early 80s to change the index used for inflation to eliminate the distinction between farm and non-farm households and households headed by men versus women, there have been very few changes. Around 2010, another panel recommended the federal government adopt a statistical measure that better measured poverty. That became the supplemental poverty measure. But again, this didn't affect the federal poverty line that's used to determine eligibility for programs. So as you can see, we are overdue to update it. So when I got to Congress, I was pretty shocked to learn that there hadn't been any proposals to actually update the poverty line in recent history. Again, there have been working groups, studies, but no actual legislative proposals to change it. So we got to work writing a bill to actually do that, to ensure the poverty line reflects modern life and is adjusted for regional differences. Is this another microphone coming at me?
No, I'm going to fix your slides. The magic button that was pressed.
There you go.
There you go.
All right. Are you advancing? You're advancing. Okay. So we introduced the Poverty Line Act, and it is H.R. 6639. Specifically, the bill would require the poverty line's calculation to include costs for food, clothing, telephone, internet, market rents by county, which includes both housing costs and utilities, childcare costs, which we know is a massive burden for households with children, as well as buffer for other costs that are hard to quantify, like transportation costs. This bill would essentially create not one new poverty line, but many poverty lines that basically become household specific based on geographic location and attributes down to the county level. So what would this bill mean in practice? To be fully transparent, I don't have an exact count of how many more people might get access to safety net benefits as a result of the bill. A lot would depend on how it's ultimately implemented. In fact, I've relied on the important work done by others like those who've developed the real cost measure. But to give you a sense of how many people this might impact, just in California, as Henry talked about, 34% of households are below the real cost measure. But the federal poverty line only recognizes about 12% in poverty in California. So you can imagine the number of households who would benefit from the increase in the federal poverty line under this bill. So across the country, tens of millions of more households would gain access to the safety net. And yes, there will be a cost associated with that. So to give you an idea of how widespread the impact could be, here is an idea of the breadth of programs, and I don't expect you to see all of these, but look at all these programs that are dependent with regard to eligibility criteria on the FPL. This includes general audience programs like SNAP, Medicaid, and LIHEAP, and legal services, but other ones with specific audiences like WIC and youth workforce programs. When I share the bill with audiences, one of the biggest questions I get is, why hasn't this been done already? And then why now? Why this effort now? And after coming from deep blue and I would say relatively functional Sacramento, I learned quickly that Washington, D.C. is a very different place in which to operate. So first, updating the poverty line is complicated. The video from West Wing that Henry played touched on some of the political reasons why it hasn't happened. There is no question, if my bill were to pass, it would cost a lot more money for the federal government to administer these programs. But my bet is that if there were political will to pass something like the Poverty Line Act, there will be a political will to fund programs at the level they need to be properly funded. In the current political reality, we know expanding the safety net is not exactly at the top of the Republican majority's to-do list. That's the one overt political statement I'll make today. So again, the question is, why now? I'll quickly share the strategy behind introducing a bill like this. First, I'll be the first to admit that while this bill represents what I think is a reasonable starting point, we're really at the beginning of what I believe will be a multi-year and possibly multi-Congress effort to make this happen. Frankly, introducing a bill is the easy part. The hard work is building the political will for a change like this and finding opportunities to advance the ideas in this bill, if not the entire thing wholesale. So to do that, it's important to have something for people to react to and to get people talking. So as discussed, there have been decades of studies on this. The only legislative proposals in the recent past have been for more studies. We put this bill forward to really try to move the conversation along. Meanwhile, bills don't often move on their own as standalone pieces of legislation. So I will be looking for ways to take elements of the bill and either push for their inclusion in other legislation or push the administration to do what it can to adopt some of these changes on its own. Meanwhile, building the political will means bringing people together, a coalition of organizations, both local and national, like the ones we have assembled today. So I'm honored to have the support for the bill from California state and local organizations, including United Way Bay Area, United Ways of California, and the California Association of Food Banks, among others, that you can see assembled on the slide. But I'm really excited that the Poverty Line Act has the support from anti-poverty organizations on the ground in not just California, but Texas, New York, Massachusetts, Illinois, Florida, and Tennessee. Major national organizations like the Children's Defense Fund, Feeding America, and Southern Poverty Law Center, National Alliance to End Homelessness, and the National Association of Social Workers have all endorsed the bill, among dozens of others. I'm also thrilled the bill is supported by United Way worldwide. As a former state legislator, this was a first full circle moment for me when I found out, without prompting from our office, the New Jersey State Senate, of all places, recently passed a resolution supporting our Poverty Line Act. So at this point, I'll simply close by sharing some ways you can help. First, I want to emphasize that we're really at the beginning here of this legislative process. So many people have worked for decades on this, and we're building on that work. Please feel free to reach out to me or my staff with feedback, suggestions, or ideas. You can also become an endorsing organization if your bylaws allow for that. And we're looking for co-sponsors and supporters, especially on a bipartisan basis. And I am concerned that this gets tossed into a partisan bucket, and it should not, because this really is a national challenge, not just a blue state challenge. There are high-cost areas, medium-cost areas across this country, and I know families of all political stripes are struggling. So we need to build a broad bipartisan coalition, and we encourage you all to join that effort. So we certainly think this is something that should be important to members from across the country and from all corners of the country. And we'd love your help or connections with counterparts in states, especially some red ones out there, so we can get them engaged as well. So thank you so much for your attention. Thank you for the work you're doing every day. It is an honor to be with all of you, an honor to represent this district. And with that, I'm going to bring up some experts who work with these issues every single day to hear their experience, not only running their organizations, but with the clients that they work with on a regular basis. So we will pause for a moment, make sure they are mic'd up properly, and we will go from there. Thank you all very much. Okay, so with that quick change, we have moved our panel into position. We are so honored to have with us today Laura Bent, the Chief Executive Officer for Samaritan House of San Mateo County. You're all familiar with her and the good work of Samaritan House. They are one of the largest core human service agencies in our county. To Laura's left, Judith Guerrero, Executive Director of Coastside Hope, the primary core human services agency serving our Mid-Coast and farm worker communities. And at the other end of the panel, Christine Padilla. She is the Director of Build Up San Mateo County, a countywide collective impact initiative that preserves, expands, and improves the supply of childcare. So with that, if I could just have you each, I gave your super brief bio, but if you could describe the work of your organization and how your work touches on our primary topic here today.
Thank you, Congressman Mullen. Good afternoon, everyone. It is my great pleasure to be here this afternoon. I want to thank Congressman Mullen and United Way Bay Area for bringing this cause to light. Samaritan House, as Congressman Mullen said, is the central and essential nonprofit agency serving those in our community to fight poverty and lift lives, essentially providing services that allow for those living in the poverty line to have food, clothing, health care, and housing. And that's essentially what we do on a daily basis for about 26,000 households in San Mateo County.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. As Laura mentioned and Congressman Mullen mentioned, we are the core agency in the Mid-Coast, and we provide services to the community, but also to part of the farm worker community. There is a larger farm worker community down south, and that's another agency. But as Laura mentions, we also provide what are called critical safety net need services. And I think after seeing Henry's presentation, I would say that our agency figures out how to make sure that people don't fall through the cracks as you no longer qualify for some of these programs. But we also get very creative on helping people stay qualified for these programs. When you think of safety net services, you think of food and you think of rental assistance, but there is a lot more that we do as an organization is also making sure that those who need to access all of these benefits have access to them.
Hi, is it on? Okay, good afternoon. It's so nice to be here. I'm with Build Up San Mateo County, and we're a county-wide initiative. As the Congresswoman said, we're working to preserve, expand, and improve, and make sure childcare is accessible and affordable to all families in San Mateo County. We know that childcare is infrastructure. It is such a basic, essential need for so many working families. So we want to ensure ultimately that every family who needs childcare is able to receive it in a high quality and affordable way so our working families can prosper. So we worked on a multi-sector solutions. We work to try to be creative, working with climate advocates, affordable housing advocates, school districts, faith-based groups, cities, just learn to work on ways to expand childcare and make it more accessible. Thank you.
Hang on. We're going to try this one more time with this. The faulty lapel mic. If we just stay with you, Laura, just hang on to that mic. Great job. I'm now scared of the microphones. So, how does the poverty line calculation or the real cost measure come into play for families in this extraordinarily high cost area? I'm sure you hear even anecdotally just the range of costs that families are struggling with on a regular basis, and how, just sort of paint that picture for us about how acute this challenge is in our county.
Sure, thank you. You know, I'll do it by telling a story, because I think that's the easiest way for folks to understand the realities of folks living in our communities and in our county that, you know, are affected by the federal poverty level. You know, we have a client at Samaritan House who is a single mother fleeing a domestic violence situation. She has a 15-year-old, a 13-year-old, and a 2-year-old. She works 2 jobs, off and on. She will hit a point where she's able to get her income up to a certain level, right? She hit a point where she was making $37 an hour, felt like she could drop the second job, right? So she starts work at 6 a.m. She gets out in time for her children to get out of school, takes a 2-hour break, goes back to work, and works basically a 4 to midnight shift as well. She hits a point where she gets $37 an hour. She figures she can drop that second salary or that second job, and she loses her food benefits. So she comes to Samaritan House to supplement the food,
right? So she can make that work for a period of time, then her car gets stolen. I can't make this stuff up. This is stuff that we hear on a regular basis. Her car gets stolen. Now she's got to deal with getting the kids back and forth to school without a car. She has a landlord that took advantage of a situation. She moves from Belmont to San Mateo. Doesn't have a car. She has to transfer her kids to a new school. That becomes a challenge because of all the paperwork and bureaucracy that she has to deal with to do that. Now she's Ubering her kids back to school and adds expense when she dropped the second job. She's got to go back and get a second job to start to supplement all over again. So it takes one issue like a car being stolen that then puts her back in a position of having to get that second job. And again, because she's considered, okay, based upon the federal poverty, she's losing benefits every time she makes a stride in her life. And without supplemental services or organizations like ours that come into play to really work with her, with not only the legal issues with the landlord, the abusive husband, the situation of the car being stolen and now dealing with the legal system and dealing with figuring out the car and getting a new car, going to other organizations to figure out how to get a new car and get her kids back and forth. These decisions and these federal poverty level issues come into play because, again, she's looked at as someone who's pretty well off because she has a decent salary. But it just takes one thing to push someone over the edge. And imagine the resilience you have to have. And a lot of what we're talking about today, I hear a lot around the transportation and the child care. Add the luxuries that we all have in life, right? So her son's an excellent baseball player, 15 years old. That costs money, right? So now she's got to pay for the kid to go to baseball, get the equipment, and I can tell you, I've got two of them. It's easily $1,200 right out of your pocket immediately. Never mind if you want to supplement anything. And she's got a daughter that plays soccer, so add that. And she's got a 2-year-old that needs childcare, right? So all of those things come into play. And when we have a federal poverty level the way it is, again, looking like she's okay, but the minute she makes one stride forward, something gets taken away. And she has to make decisions around that every day. So that's just the reality of a picture of just one person that we deal with on a regular basis.
Yes, I will tell you the story of my mother, who is a farm worker, and I actually did some math before coming. She gets paid $17.50 an hour. She has to renew her Medi-Cal, and it's time to go through the audit again. She's not working 40 hours because after the pandemic, her hours were reduced to, instead of 8 hours per day, now she does 6 hours per day. My stepdad can no longer work, so my mom is the sole breadwinner for the house. I calculated her income to be about $36,000 per year. In her income, she went to try to renew, and I think this is something that as providers we try to do. Not that we want to, but we have to get creative to make sure that people retain their benefits. She was told that she has to stop working 1 day per week so that she could qualify. That seems counterproductive, right? We're encouraging people to be financially sustainable, but at the same time, as Laura mentions, it seems that when you try to advance financially, you're penalized and you're losing some of the safety nets that are helping you survive. That's the story of my mother, but that's the story of many farm workers on the coast. Not only farm workers, but hospitality workers. And I think many of the stories of also as Laura and I attend meetings where at times, even our own staff are trying to play the system so that they can continue to survive in this very expensive county.
I will just touch on something similar. Judith and I were talking about this beforehand, but nationally, child care workers make about $18 an hour, so that's about $38,000 annually, very close to the farm worker wages she just talked about, of course. And so whether or not these issues are being acknowledged, if how many people are in poverty or how many people have jobs, what we know is the child care workforce is predominantly women, and specifically predominantly women of color. So someone is subsidizing this, and it's them subsidizing it by low wages. So it's something that we really have to think about, because the people who we are depending on caring for our children, whose brains are developing the most, 0 through 5, I mean 85%, I mean this is a very important job. We're counting on them to do this work and be struggling themselves as they're trying to help families. So I think something like this, where if people could have childcare included in the real cost measure, that would free up money for safer, more affordable housing, for food, for other needs. So this is really promising. I know it may take a long time, but just seeing all of this now is very promising, specifically for, I think, the child care workforce, and of course the working mothers who are trying to make a living.
So Christine was just talking about the child care challenge. The economics of child care were always puzzling to me because the workers don't make enough. The operators have trouble making their businesses run because they've got high overhead, they've got regulatory issues they have to deal with, and then it's super expensive for families too. I mean, it's calling out for more subsidies and maybe universal child care in this county. But Christine, you're doing incredible work. But Christine, at the end there, touched on, if her clients were eligible for other benefits, if we made this adjustment, it could help her do the work serving her individuals. So Samaritan House, you're dealing on the housing front, dealing with homeless challenges and the range of issues there. But if those individuals could qualify for other benefits surrounding them, that helps you do the job that you do in serving them, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think if the real cost benefits were acknowledged, it makes the job of the safety net service organizations a little easier, because then the benefits that would come to those that we're serving can really help them live a little more affordably, and then we truly are just supplementing some of the needs that are not being met. Whereas right now we're just trying to provide all that we possibly can to keep people whole and housed on a regular basis. And I think something like this federal poverty line change and act would definitely support our organizations in doing better work in helping folks lift up out of poverty, truly lift up without having all of these other various issues come into play, taking 2 steps forward and 30 steps back because you've lifted yourself up a little bit and now you're getting penalized on the other end because your benefits are being reduced. I think we need to level the playing field here and make sure that the benefits are matching where our clients are in life as they move forward and make progress as they become more self-sufficient.
I would add that, revising the poverty line would make more sense, as I look at math and figure out how many farm workers, and I'll go back to the story of my mother, how is it that it seems like she's being punished for trying to do better for herself, right? So I think to what you said too, it could also prevent homelessness, right? Because you could have access to benefits before you fall through the cracks. So it would really revolutionize the way that we can lift up people, as Laura says, and I would say even prevent people from being homeless.
I'll just add that the real cost measure will help us advocate for universal childcare. It is a great place to start and plead for new policies that are focused on children and families. So that part is excellent. There was a survey that our county's Commission on the Status of Women put out, and it talked about one mother who said that universal childcare would completely change her life, and it would help her to stop having to make choices between food and going to the laundromat. And in a county like ours, we should not have families deciding between clean clothes and eating.
Hear on that. So just a quick reminder for our audience, you can use the QR code to submit questions, and we'll run those up with the remaining few minutes we have. So there was a question from the audience that came in that says, in the United Way presentation, the myth of people not working was disproven. What other myths do you want the public to move away from? So misconceptions of the kinds of issues we're talking about here, things that are continual frustrations for you when you talk with others about the work you do and sort of the perceptions out there of your clientele. I'm curious myself what that answer is.
Maybe I'll start. I get a little passionate about this one, so I'll just wait.
I'm an immigrant myself, and I think many times it's perceived that immigrants are taking advantage of benefits, right? That you just come to this country, you have a child, and now you can have access to all of those benefits. Well, that's not true. As you said, immigrants are hardworking individuals, and at times being an immigrant, depending on your status, it's harder to survive in the economy. But I will say that everyone that comes through the doors of COSI Hope is a really hardworking individual, just having a really hard time trying to survive.
I will keep it brief since we'll pass it on to Laura. But I would just say that the myth that families can do more or childcare can cost less is not true. Families cannot pay more, and childcare workforce cannot survive on less. It's very complex, but we do need measures like this, as well as we need public funding on the national level, state, and local. We need to invest in this. Early childcare workers make less, almost half of what a kindergarten makes, and they're, I think, 1 in 8 more times to need public assistance than a K-8 teacher. So we can't have our early childhood educators struggling.
Okay, I thought it through now. So I think there's a couple things, right? So a vibrant community and with a robust economy requires that there be many levels of working individuals in the community, and that includes, our hotel workers, our restaurant workers, all of these individuals. The myth that is out there is that, the folks that we're serving are lazy, unskilled, and lack the motivation to take advantage of the American dream, so to speak. That is a complete myth, and it is one that irritates me every time I hear it. The folks that we are working with are often working, again, 2 or more jobs. They are working in skilled labor jobs that require a certain level of skill, a certain level of education, a certain level of knowledge, and a certain level of expertise, and are by no means lazy. They are hard-working individuals trying to make a better life for their families, and they are typically more resilient, and that word keeps coming up, and that's an important word, more resilient than many people in our society because of the decisions that they have to make. Their financial literacy has to be solid because they have to make decisions every day based upon, again, am I doing laundry? Am I buying food for the table? Am I paying rent? Am I paying for new tires on my car? These are folks that are living on a very strict budget and have to be very literate in how they make decisions, or things slip even further. So I think the myth that folks are lazy and unskilled and put themselves in positions really needs to be rectified, because these folks, again, are hardworking, highly motivated, to make sure that their families are living the American dream to the extent possible. So that's where I will leave it for now.
I'm just going to check over here if we have any coming in. You guys didn't write these down, right? These are actual questions from the audience? Okay. How can local decision makers, and we have many in the audience, I see, thank you guys for being here. How can local decision makers help beyond endorsing the Poverty Line Act? What are examples to bridge the income needs gap? Is that to me? Because that's a tricky question. Well, look, local decision makers don't look past the importance of endorsing. I know there's some challenges around local boards endorsing federal endorsing in federal issues. That is sort of a balancing act for our local officials when it comes to something like the Poverty Line Act, which has a real effect on the work local governments do, local nonprofits do. I think there's a nexus there. We would welcome any and all support to show that there's lots of grassroots support for that. How do we bridge the income and needs gap? This is an enormous challenge, right? Laura and I, before we came up here, were talking about examples where folks are turning down pay raises because they're worried about the impact on their eligibility. That is actually happening. It is crazy that people have to make that choice to turn down a pay increase. This entire area needs a lot of scrutiny and real attention. I think the challenge for somebody like me is to show that this isn't just a wealthy areas problem, that these are national cost challenges where families are trying to make ends meet. But any general thoughts on just that sort of quandary that workers find themselves and maybe turning down a second job that may be actually feasible for them to do because of the impacts downstream on their eligibility?
Yeah, I mean, we face this with our own employees at Samaritan House. We've had employees literally say to us, please do not give me that raise until after June 1st. And we've lost employees because of the wages and the differential. We've had employees become pregnant, have children, and leave us because the cost of childcare didn't match up with the fact that they were going to remain employed. That has a huge impact on an organization like ours, who we invest a tremendous amount in getting our employees trained and ready to work with the folks that we're working with, and when they choose to leave us, of course, for the right reasons of staying with their children because economically it doesn't work to work and pay the child care bill, that has a huge impact on our ability to get our work done. So these things have critical impacts on organizations and the families that we're serving. When someone's turning down a raise because it's going to affect their benefits, right? Again, it feels like a punishment or a penalization. And that's not good for morale. It's not good, again, for the organization and our ability to do the job that we need to do for those that we're serving. The last piece that I'll just add, and I thought of this as Congressman Mullen was speaking, was the impacts that folks are worried about fiscally. We have to look at some of the inefficiencies, right? It costs way more for someone to become homeless and get back up on their feet and become housed again than it would to supplement the benefits and keep them whole to begin with. So we need to really educate and advocate and really help people understand that it really would be more cost effective for us to keep people whole and housed. And not be afraid to supplement those benefits, because the vast majority of people are not taking advantage. They really want to make things work. So that would be my last piece.
I would add to what Laura said that I don't think it's news to any of us, but many, as the presentation showed, many of us are, I think it's rent burden, the term, right? So I would say, as Congressman Mullins mentioned, not a one-year solution, but we do need more affordable housing. Many of the clients that are coming through the doors of Coast I Hope are coming seeking rental assistance because, you know, the rent has increased. Your wage, for those who do need it and take it, it increases sometimes less than $1, but everything else increases more than $1. And housing is at the basis of many of the challenges of the community that I serve.
I will comment. David Fleshman, who's the executive director of Four Cs, tells this story about a mother who got a raise of $1 and then she lost her child care subsidy and how she had to go to an appeal. And that is wild, and it sounds like it's happening all over, and it just shows that the system is broken. It's not practical. It's not working for people if you can't make another dollar, and then you would lose childcare, and then you can't work at all. So I think going back to the question, what local leaders can do besides endorsing, which I think I would highly recommend endorsing, but is talk about this issue more freely, you know, on your councils or with communities. I'm a San Mateo County native, and I think there's always been huge disparities within our county. We seem like a very wealthy county, but that's not the case for everyone. I mean, obviously we have many billionaires, which is billionaires, but we also have people in line for food pantries. So I think that's an issue that's not discussed comfortably enough about the different pockets in our community that are often ignored. So I would just encourage those conversations and policies that help improve the lives of working families and children.
So I think we have time for just about 2 more questions from everybody, and then we will wrap and get you on your way. But there was a question that came in about assuming the poverty line is raised and my bill passes. I love that optimism. And more people have access to benefits. Are the systems set up to provide those services to more people? And I think that sort of gets to the point I alluded to in my presentation, which is if more people are eligible, we now have to be properly funding the agencies that are helping these individuals. So I guess a general question about your capacity, your ability, if there were a major change, to sort of accommodate a broader set of individuals. And maybe if I could start, since you get stuck with the first answer, I'll start down here and then we'll go this way, just how that might work in the childcare. You already talked about the capacity challenges.
I think that's definitely something that would have to be looked at. We have a lot of issues going on where originally we have about 17,000 slots, like a deficit of them for childcare slots. So that's 17,000 families, give or take, looking for care. But we can't fill them for some parts. We don't have the facilities, and other issues, we don't have the workforce. And it's hard to encourage people to come into a workforce where they aren't going to make a whole lot of money. So I think there are issues. I would say even with nonprofits and groups doing advocacy and policy, we're always sort of short-staffed and under-resourced, but that's not really anything new. This would still benefit us a great deal, and I think as much as we would have to put more resources into our nonprofits and the stakeholders doing the work, having families thrive and do better and be able to survive better would just make our job so much easier. So in that fact, it would be a huge win for all of us.
I would agree with Christine. You are right. It would require more funding for organizations like Samaritan House, Coast I Hope, and Christine's. But we are ready. I can tell you my organization, we're small, and we're small on the coast too. So this number is big for me, but maybe not for you guys. But last fiscal year, we served over 4,000 individuals on the coast. And what I'm working on right now is trying to have another case managers. We do that. We serve 4,000 individuals with 2 case managers. And I know that they're not being served to the best of our ability. So if there was funding to bring someone else, we could help more efficiently, right? And we could help make sure that people are having better chances to sustain themselves. But it does require money. We are nonprofits, people do volunteer, but we also need to be fair to our employees because they're living in the same situation as all the individuals that we're talking about.
Yeah, and I echo what Judith and Christine both said, and I will add, not to be overly optimistic, but I will share that when the COVID, I know nobody likes that word anymore, but when the COVID crisis hit, I will say Samaritan House was serving 15,000 households. We now serve 25,000, more than 25,000 households. Were we ready for that? Absolutely not. Did we scale very quickly, very creatively? Absolutely. So if the opportunity rises, so will the nonprofits. That is the way that we work in this county. So while we see that as a challenge, given the opportunity to be a little bit more strategic than we had with COVID, we can certainly, put our minds to work and be creative in how we solve for that and make sure that we are ready when the time comes.
And just last question, you uttered the word strategic, so this is really a strategic question around strategy. How can nonprofits, philanthropy, the business sector, and elected officials, many of whom are assembled here, engage with one another to better address the cost of living crisis, where we are quite literally on the front line here, being one of the most expensive counties in America? Big question without an easy answer. Big question, but anything that we haven't touched on yet today that you want to emphasize?
I think you've covered a lot, and measures like this really make me proud that you're our representative in Congress. So, I mean, after all of these years, when you look at a slide and you're like, work, panel, study, nothing. And it's kind of reminds me of early childhood education, like study, nothing. And you know how powerful it is, but yet it's not getting fixed. So I do feel very hopeful. And I'm just glad that all of the essentials are included. It's just insane that transportation and childcare and internet wouldn't be included, where yet in the 60s they didn't have internet. So I mean, that's how dated it is. But I mean, ideally, we would have all of our families in this county having access to shelter, food, water, electricity, internet, all of the basics, so they could, work on all of the others. We're not even talking about luxuries at all. That's the hard part here. And I know what the work Samaritan House does is so critical, but I mean, they're not luxuries. They're just filling in the gaps for the essentials. So I really appreciate that, but I think you've covered a lot.
I would say collaboration, right? I think whenever I go to any of these meetings, I hear that San Mateo County is the best at collaboration, and I have seen that, as Laura talked about during COVID. If it had not been for the lack of collaboration that my agency was able to leverage with San Mateo County, we wouldn't have had access to many of the vaccines. So I think the key is working together, rowing towards the same direction, supporting each other. I also want to thank you for taking on this hard topic. I think as elected officials, sometimes people can shy away from some of these hard topics, so I really appreciate that you're taking this on. I wish more people would follow and support you, and I am hopeful that you are going to pass this, however many Congress it will take, but we'll be here and it'll still be needed. But for me, it's been collaboration. As a smaller organization living in a bit of a more isolated area of San Mateo County, I depend a lot on collaborating with others to bring the resources that I needed in my community.
Yeah, thank you. I will echo that. I think one of the things that I say to folks often is that San Mateo County is the most collaborative county, and I feel very blessed to work in this community because we do come together to solve hard problems. COVID was a shining example of that for sure. And I think with your leadership and the fact that you're willing to be vulnerable and convene and have hard conversations, we need more of that when it comes to this big of a topic. We need to convene and strategize together and have really hard conversations and be vulnerable with each other to talk about the things that are working, that are not working, and really solve problems together. And I think that's, how we are going to make this work and how we get things done well in this county. And so thank you again for bringing us all together. We need to do it more.
Now I'm inspired. That's great. Let's thank our panel. Great job, you all. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, United Way. I believe I toss it back to Kelly. There you are, Kelly. Just to wrap us up, but thank you all for your attention and, more importantly, for your great work on a daily basis in this county. Thank you all.
All right, thank you so much for this conversation. I'll just close out by saying thank you, Congressman Mullen. Thank you to the panelists. I do think that it kind of strikes me, the West Wing video that we watched where Sam said, and Toby, I love the West Wing, said, are you telling me there's however many more poor people, under our administration? And the fact is, whether we change the federal poverty line or not, there are people suffering in our communities, right? It isn't about, your organizations are already serving these people, whether the line says it or not, right? So I think all of us doing our part to tell the story, all of us using this data, go to the Real Cost Measure website, use the budget, use the information, reach out to Jess on our team, and she can help you think about a strategy to start using it. Endorse the Poverty Line Act. These are all things that you can do today that are action that we can take. I've been waiting for this moment to have someone put something out there where we can call someone to action around the Real Cost Measure, because we have this information, now let's do something about it. So, and it's possible. Coming together, we can do it. It's possible. So just want to thank you for being here. Thank you for coming. Please, we have copies of the Real Cost Measure with us today, and we're just so glad you're here. What did I miss, Jess? Yes, eat some food. Excellent. Yes, and big thank you to Jess, who's really been the mastermind and the strategic person here. So, all right. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Rachel will show.